So yes, I was talking about deploying MediaWiki to Kubernetes, and you might wonder, like, why should I do that? What's the benefit of it? And so first, I'll just give a quick explanation of Kubernetes, which is it's a container orchestration system. So if you deploy things in Docker containers, you might like Kubernetes, and it has quite a few different features. I think the basic ones that I find quite appealing are load balancing, rolling upgrades, resiliency. So like if something fails, your app gets restarted, auto scaling, and internal networking. So I thought I'd do a little demonstration of deploying MediaWiki into Kubernetes. And what we need to get started is a Docker image that can serve MediaWiki, a MySQL database, Kubernetes cluster, and the command line tool for Kubernetes, which is kubectl. I've already prepared all these things ahead of time just because of the limited time we have today. But just to elaborate on the Kubernetes cluster, you could deploy it on your own machine if you want to play around in Minikube, but you might have to do a few extra steps that I don't do here. Or you could use any cloud provider. I'm going to use Google Kubernetes Engine just because I'm familiar with it, but any one of them works. So let's try it. I also have all the files that we're going to use uploaded to GitHub in case you want to play around with it later. And now I'm going to thread over my terminal here so you can see that. And I'll make, I'm actually going to make the text a bit bigger. So hopefully that's big enough. The first thing that I want to do is this command, get pods, to see what we already have deployed to our Kubernetes cluster. And you can see that I've deployed MariaDB here. But you can run your database anywhere that you want. It doesn't have to be within Kubernetes. And then I'm going to show you how we can deploy MediaWiki through something called like, why is it not showing up? Oh, because I spelled it wrong. Through this YAML specification for a deployment. You can also just use Kubernetes to the kubectl command to deploy it without using a YAML specification, but we have a few things we want to configure, so I find it easier to create this and apply it whenever I have changes to make. So there's some boilerplate here, but basically we're saying that our app is going to be called MediaWiki, and we want one MediaWiki deployment here. And then we have this selector part, which basically controls this resource in Kubernetes that we're going to add called a replica set, and it just needs to know what it's controlling here. So this is just matching this right here. And then the important stuff down here is our spec, which it defines this a concept called a pod, which can contain many different Docker containers, but we're just going to put one Docker container into it, which I've built and uploaded ahead of time, and calling it MediaWiki. And then we want to say which port we want to expose. I've also added an entry point here, but you can go without that if you have one in your Docker file. And then I've just added some resources, requests, and limits to say that my pod or my container actually cannot use more than this much CPU and memory, and should at least have the request amount. Finally, we need the environment variables to configure MediaWiki, which I've added here. So after taking a quick look at that, I'm going to deploy it. So I'll do kube control, apply F for file, and YAML. And you can see that it's been created. If you get pods now, you'll see I have this pod running. We still need to install MediaWiki because I wanted to make this pretty simple, so I didn't add any sort of job to do that installation. So I need to shell into my container with this command, and then the pod name. And I'll run this setup script that I'll show you that I've added. Here. Oops. And basically, it just checks if the DB is available, and then it runs the install script right here, and does some manipulation of our local settings file. So I'm going to run that now. Oh, yeah. So that's all done. And I'm just gonna exit that. So now that we have our deployment, we still can't really do anything because it's not exposed to the outside world outside of this cluster. So we need to create what's called a service resource. And I'll show you. Actually, before we do that, I wanted to show you something about the replicas. So you can see that we've described one replica here in our spec. So if I change this to 2, and then I apply again, and look at our pods, you can see that we have 2 MediaWiki containers. And then if I just delete one, this might take a little bit. longer than usual, but we can check now. You can see that it's getting deleted, but we've also added a new pod. And that's because we specified that there should always be 2 replicas. So now I'll take a look at our service. And it's pretty simple. So the important part here is on the type of service. There's a few different types, but the simplest and easiest one to use for now is called node port, and that will allow us to use the external IP of the nodes within our cluster to access our deployment. And then this important selector here helps you tie your service to your deployment. So in my deployment.yaml, I said that my deployment was called MediaWiki. The app label is called MediaWiki. So I add this here, and then I say which ports and protocols I want to use to expose. And so the target port is the port that's exposed by your container. And that's what we added in our deployment.yaml file. And then this port is the port that we want our pod, which the container is inside, to expose. So I've chosen port 80. So when I apply this, it will actually create a node port for me to use with my external IP address. So if I do get service, you can see my service here. It's now called Wiki, but I don't see an external IP here because of the type of service I've used. So I need to get it from my nodes, and then we can access MediaWiki. So I'll do that real quickly. And you can also, I'll paste in maybe to the chat, the link, so that you can try accessing it too, if you like. This is a bit annoying to get this external address. So we'll use that. And the port number of the node port. I've pasted in. And the nice thing about this is also if you have multiple nodes, as I do now, because I've made my node size very small, so it needs to add extra for all the things that I'm adding into my cluster. But any of these external IPs can be used to access your service. It will load balance to any of your pods that are from the same deployment, and you can access it from the node port. Let's try it out. And here it is. I'll show you if I delete the service, what happens. We can no longer access the Wiki. So let's try it again. There it is. Now we have a different port number, so we'll have to update that. That's one reason why, if you're in a production environment, you wouldn't want to use a node port service. But all of the stuff that I've added to the GitHub repo, I would say is definitely not production quality, but it could help you if you just want to try it out. All right. Should I paste that new port number in for you? I just saw the question about parsoid. Yes, I still haven't figured out how to enable the new parsoid yet. So that's why it's broken. All right. So I thought I'd show one more thing if we have time, which is horizontal pod autoscaler, which can scale your pods up and down based on metrics. And first, let's first change our number of replicas to 1 so that we can more easily see how it works. And we'll apply that. Okay, so the final file I have is this horizontal pod autoscaler spec. Again, we have to target a deployment and the name MediaWiki so it knows what it's trying to scale. And then you can choose how many replicas you'd like to allow to exist and how many you want to have at minimum. And then the metrics, I think by default, what's included from the metrics server is the CPU and memory utilization. But if you add your own metrics gatherer, you can do other things like number of requests and so on. So I've targeted our CPU utilization of 50. It could be higher, but because my nodes are really small, I would, once we get up to the CPU utilization target, we might have to create a new node. And this will happen automatically because I'm using GKE and I've set it up that way. However, it could take a little bit of time. And then the MediaWiki image is quite large. So if it doesn't already exist on the node, even though I've specified not to always pull the image, but if there's a new node, it might need time to pull the image, which could take a few minutes. So let's try it. So now we can get our HPA. And let's wait until we see this number show up, the actual utilization. There it is, 2%. So now we need to give our MediaWiki a little bit of load. And I'm gonna do, so if you would like to access it, feel free, but I'm also going to run a little thing to, oh, there we actually see a new container being created right now. So if we do, I might not have to actually run anything. You can see it's already at 66%. So we've scaled up our replicas. It's easier to see if you just do get pods normally. Yeah. Let's try it again. No, 19. So I'll try it. Oopsie. This. To give it a little more load. Well, oops, I think I messed something up. I'm not sure what happened there. Let's do this again. Oops. I messed something up here. But we do have a lot of containers being created.
There's a note from somebody in the comments about backslash in front of the semicolon.
Oh, is there? Oh, that one. Thank you. You're done. Oh, there's one. Here, two. There's that. I'm not. Oh, there's another one. I'm not sure. But we can see that we've had quite a few containers or pods getting created. So I think we've all given it enough load. And I'm ready for questions if we have time. We'd like to do that.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. I'm going to type them in the backstage. Just to start out, it wasn't really a question, but I'll add it for impact. It came from a comment in the chat that reads, I'll never ask the question, what's the benefit of Kubernetes? The answer is always yes. So to turn into a question, do you agree, or possibly when would orchestrating with Kubernetes be a bad idea?
When would it be a bad idea? That's a good question. I think, there's like a lot of things that need to get set up to use Kubernetes. So maybe if you have like just something really simple and you're not, concerned about resiliency or all those things that I said at the beginning, then like why bother going to the effort? I think it's probably not necessary. I think that Kubernetes is becoming like an industry standard and lots of people are using it, but I don't think that means that it's really necessary for every single use case.
Okay.
Should I read the question, or did you have a follow-up?
There's two questions in the backstage. If you can read it and then address it.
Sure. So the manual entry into the container for init only needs to be called once in the wiki's lifetime, correct? Yes, that is correct. It used to be last year when I was doing some experiments with running MediaWiki and Kubernetes and the year before, that it could be run multiple times and would be fine, but currently running it again will cause an error in the script. I think MediaWiki will still run fine, it just won't have run the actual install script all the way. So what's in the Docker image? If you can summarize any special config needed for MediaWiki. Yeah, so I can show you on GitHub. We can look at this Docker file. This is the Docker file that I used to create this Docker image. So it looks pretty simple. Basically, we're just creating some users, copying core, copying the local settings and the setup script. But it's based on this Docker file that we've created for dev purposes, which has the configuration for Apache in it and has PHP FPM also installed on it. And if you want to see actually the this Docker file or template for this particular base image that I'm using, it's actually on there on Garrett somewhere, if I can find it for you. So yeah, you can try these out, but as they're called dev images, I definitely don't recommend them for any production applications. And this is the one that I used for this particular demo. So you can see here, it's based on Stretch. It does have some extra things for like debugging. And then the Apache and PHP configuration. Any other questions?
You may have answered it, but there was one question. Is it one Docker image for MediaWiki, MySQL, PHP, etc., or a separate image for each application?
Right. So it's one Docker image that I'm using right now. They're just based on other Docker images so that we can create the final image by basically what we want to do is have some base images that are controlled by us so that we can ensure that they're all the way that we like. Add the MediaWiki put on top of it into one final image. However, more recently, we have separated the server and the MediaWiki files themselves into two separate containers. So you can also do that. It just depends on what you want to do. It's probably just for testing stuff. It's perfectly fine to just include them all in the same image.